The third management mode, we argue, is another version of not being able to define a problem very well. And we argue that there's still a lot of appropriate risk managerial activity, even if you're not sure what the problem is, that it's worthwhile accumulating a broad information base, that the search for unfamiliar possibilities is appropriate, that having capabilities for dealing with surprises is appropriate. And a couple of examples we've liked to use have been the discovery that PBDE, flame retardants, are ubiquitous in the environment and appear in mother's milk, for instance. The concern about acrylamides, which are a byproduct of frying, but were earlier treated, at least in the United States, only as a potential water contaminant, which has brought about a big discrepancy. A recent example might be plastic baby bottles and bisphenol A contamination. Does this mean anything or not? But these things keep popping up, and they're found by a variety of activities that are not directed specifically at the hazard. Okay, let me see if I can shift. Oh no. Help! I'm not good at this. I think if I use older technology, I may do better. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about nanotechnology. The characteristic, this is at least a bit more of the psychometric modes, but it's still pretty old-fashioned. But can be thought of as insidious threats, the basic problem. Things that one might be concerned about are its persistence, invisibility, lack of familiarity, the issue of is it or is it not natural, and to what extent people's exposures are under anybody's control, and the long potential, if there are any effects, latency of effects. These are difficult hazards to talk about, even when you know the science quite well. We know a great deal about radioactive materials, and yet there have been a lot of vexing issues in risk communication. In fact, the nuclear scene has been a very fertile territory for research and perception and communication. And at a very simple level, among the issues are that there are anxieties evoked, and they make communication difficult, and trust or lack of trust seriously impinges on any kind of managerial activity. Okay. What we're supposed to say for this conference as speakers here was something about key variables and something about modes of communication. And the argument I'm trying to pitch to you today is that considering these kinds of management possibilities is actually an interesting arena for thinking about relevant perceptual variables, and also for thinking about modes of communication. So that's what I want to throw out. That's my experiment. I think that adaptive management invites attention to some of the familiar things, contamination in environments, contamination as it may be found in people. But it also invites consideration of things that relate to what people might do with such information. What are the capabilities to keep track of these findings? What are the capabilities, to what extent will people perceive a capability for responding to findings? And what kinds of concerns are evoked about continuity and trust? Any long-term issue of management, any adaptive management, any program involving vigilance is assuming a time element and has demands for continuity and belief that things will continue over time. When you do problem framing, I think we have big issues about to what extent are nanotechnologies, one technology, many technology, a few technologies, many technologies. Are they most appropriately classified as nanotechnologies? Well, there's science behind classifying them that way, but the way they appear in practice may be somewhat different. I think these are critical issues that have to be explored, and also critical from a management perspective is to what extent they do or do not fall into other paradigms like toxic chemicals. As far as vigilance is concerned, I think you want to learn something about, in part of perceptions, whether or not the stuff is all around you, how ubiquitous it is. I think that there may be questions about the knowledge base, how well things are understood. I think the issue of what might go wrong, where are there hidden hazards, is of concern. And I think there's also the issue of who's responsible, was brought up in some of these issues. As far as modes of communication goes, I think that the analytic deliberative model could be applied even when you don't know anything. So that limits, to some extent, what you can deliberate about and how much analysis there is, but that you can have a characterization of what can and cannot be done, what kinds of monitoring may seem appropriate, and so on, so that communication within that mode, I think, should be feasible. To some extent, there is experience in a much better understood hazard, as I said, these contaminated sites within the weapons complex. I have to say, my knowledge of that experience is that it's been pretty mixed. But I also think that it doesn't mean that it's impossible. And finally, I do want to say within communication, this gets a little bit at the issue of epistemic versus social trust. But my belief is that expert